Like and subscribe right now, or this spider will crawl on your face when you're sleeping. From people who were believed to be dead, but weren't dead in reality, to those who faked their own funerals to see who would turn up and how everybody would react, you'll find all sorts of strange situations when people woke up at their funeral and shocked the people present there in this video. Join us as we reveal to you 10 times people woke up at their own funerals. Number 10. The 2-week reprieve. This is the story of Walter Williams, a 78-year-old man from Mississippi who had a very simple kind of death. He passed away, was checked by the medical examiner, and was later put into a body bag and then taken to the local funeral home to be processed for the funeral and ceremony. As he was taken to the embalmer's room, whose job it is to make sure that the body is both rigid and preserved for some time, the person there noticed that Walter's legs were moving. The coroner was, needless to say, stunned and started to pay close attention to what was going on. Walter then started to breathe and was actually still alive. Think about this for a moment. Not only did his death fool some people, it fooled a lot of them, including the medical personnel who declared him dead. Then he somehow survived being put in a body bag and being transported without being suffocated, only to miraculously be woken up by some sort of stimuli. That's a lot of things that have to go right or wrong for you to be presumed dead and not be killed before being brought to your own funeral. Unfortunately for Walter, it was not meant to be, and just after 2 weeks of his fake death, he passed away for real. The family was unsure though, and they double-checked. "I think he's gone this time," confirmed his nephew.
Before we move on, I've got a little challenge for you that'll take 5 seconds to complete. So here's the deal. You just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and you'll get 25 years of amazing luck. Try it. It really works.
Number 9. The case of mistaken identity. When you go to a funeral, you should know 100% that the person you're burying is your loved one or friend, right? In fact, you've likely gone and seen the body of your lost one at least once before the funeral for proper identification. However, in the case of one Gilberto Araujo of Brazil, things weren't as simple as they seem to appear. You see, he'd been believed to be killed in a violent attack at his workplace, and his brother came around to identify Gilberto as deceased. Thus, the funeral was arranged, and all the family came to mourn. But then, to everyone's surprise, Gilberto arrived at the door and was wondering why everyone was mourning him while he was still very much alive. Confused? Yeah, we're confused too, and so let us make it clear what had happened. Gilberto worked at a car wash, and at his workplace, someone was killed, and that person just so happened to look a lot like him, and that's why the brother thought that Gilberto was dead. Though you honestly have to question whether he was close to his brother, because you'd think that he'd recognize that the man killed was nothing more than a look-alike. Number 8. Death, life, and death again. You could argue that Fagiliu Mukhomedsanov of Russia was one of the worst return-to-life stories ever, because in 2011, she was believed to have died from a heart attack. She was taken to a hospital where she was declared dead. A funeral was arranged a few days later, and as she was laying in her coffin, she woke up, and to her surprise, there were people all around her, mourning her death. She panicked on this sight and was taken to the hospital, where she died after only 12 minutes, this time permanently. Number 7. Seeing Who Would Come, Part 1. To many, funerals are a sad time, but to others, in various cultures, funerals are a measure of the impact you made in your life, because the more people that arrive at your funeral, the more people you impacted while you were alive. For a Chinese man, Zhang Diang, he wondered how much he had impacted people in his 66 years of life so far, so he went and staged his own funeral. Now, before you just go and blast him for his vanity, there's more going on in here than just that. In Chinese culture, the dead are said to have needs, and their graves are supposed to be visited regularly to ensure that those needs are met. So he wanted to make sure that those needs were met via the people that would come to his funeral. And on the bright side for him, the 40 people he invited did show up, as well as hundreds of other people who wanted to pay a tribute to the deceased. However, there was a problem of who didn't appear at the funeral, as there were 20 relatives and friends who didn't show up. It's unbelievable for him how many of his relatives and friends didn't care at all about him. It's very sad, but since he was still alive, he could haunt them in a very personal way to ensure that they do come to his actual funeral. Number 6. Seeing Who Would Come, Part 2. If you think that only a few people stage their own funerals to see who would come, you'd be wrong, because a Serbian man named Vuk Peric decided to do his own fake funeral to see who would show up. More than likely, it was a closed casket affair, and he decided to watch the entire funeral ceremony from a distance, which is a curious thing for sure. When he felt that the proceedings went on for long enough, he went down and thanked everyone who had mourned him. Perhaps when the shock wore off that he was still alive, the people probably weren't pleased that they'd been messed with like that. Would you want to be told that a person you cared for is dead, and then have them show up to thank you for coming and mourning them? Probably no. Number 5. Death Becomes a Holiday. This very unique story comes from the village of Brahing in Hertfordshire, England, and dates all the way back to 1571. A local farmer by the name of Matthew Wall had passed away, and the whole village came together to mourn him, as you would expect. However, there was a slight problem. You see, as the casket was being carried to the burial site, one of the pallbearers went and dropped the coffin, which obviously would have been a big deal on its own because of the sanctity of it all. However, when the coffin was dropped and the body fell out, Wall woke up and was naturally surprised by what was going on. Now, you might think that the villagers would have been rightfully frightened by this resurrection story, and maybe they were in their own way, but not long after they created their own holiday called the Old Man's Day to celebrate the revival of Matthew Wall, a man who continued to live until 1595, proving that death really didn't have his number for quite some time. Number 4. NICEPHORUS GLYCAS. NICEPHORUS GLYCAS was a bishop working in Lesbos, Greece, and as you might expect, upon his passing, his church had many particular and specific methods that they would impart on the fallen to make sure he had a proper burial. For example, in the case of a death, the body was left out to be displayed and mourned by the fall. This event was to go on for 2 days, and on the second day, everyone in the church was shocked when the bishop woke up and started to demand to know what was going on around him. As it would turn out, he was napping for some days, apparently. As this happened in 1896, so I guess the 1800s were really just a weird time. Number 3. How not to show up to your own funeral. Certain pieces of etiquette are to be followed when going to a funeral, one of which is not to be drunk or high on various narcotics. But does that pertain to the person who is dead? Edison Vicuna would no doubt argue no. You see, he went missing in his home country of Ecuador, and as he didn't report in for days, his family felt that he was dead. Then, a body was found, but the face was horribly disfigured because of a car accident. An autopsy was done, and it was found out that the body belonged to Edison. Hearing this, the family threw a funeral for him. At the funeral, Edison surprisingly showed up, and that too, totally drunk. People were freaked out about what was going on, but when the body was re-examined, it was realized that it wasn't Edison. And with that, it's now time for today's subscriber pick. Today's photo was sent to us by a subscriber. If you come across a photo online and want to know more details about it, just send it over to us. We might even feature it on a future video. Number 2. This is a photoshopped image of a person in a casket during a funeral. The idea of the picture is the same as the stories of people waking up at their own funerals, as we've told you about in this video. How would your reaction be if a loved one woke up and came out of a casket during their own funeral? Would sure be creepy and weird, and you never know what is going to happen in this world. Number 1. Waiter, this man is still alive. Another more recent death story happened in 2012, when waiter Hamdi Hafez Al-Nubi had a heart attack at just 28 years old. A very odd thing. But after being examined, he was declared dead, and his family started to prepare the body for its last rites via Islamic traditions. The body, after being prepared for the burial, was sent to the medical examiner for a final check and death certificate signing, where the examiner realized that the body was still warm. After a proper checkup, it was declared the man was still alive, and the family had a celebration instead of a funeral, which is probably a better gathering to have, in our opinion. What did you think about these stories? Did any of them leave you shocked? Tell us in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe.